Welcome everybody to a new series that we are calling The Briefing Room. What is The Briefing Room? It will be a video series dedicated to analyzing, discussing, and exploring the history of military vehicles and hardware. Have you or your friends ever asked, why is this thing so slow? What does this do? What was this meant for? Or, why does it look like that? Hopefully in this new series we can educate you about something that we are all very passionate about. This first episode will be about the 843 Black Prince, and Sturmling will be my guest today.
Hello.
The Churchill was a infantry tank that was born out of the lessons from World War I.
The British believed that with the appearance of the Maginot and Siegfried fortification lines, that there was a very strong risk of a similar stagnating conflict as they saw in the First World War. The Churchill was born of that early First World War tank philosophy. A slow, armored box that infantry could be following into combat. Something that moved no faster than the marching pace of your average soldier, but could offer a basically bulwark from which they can fight behind and around. The Churchill shares many, at least superficial features with other early Mark series tanks, such as a continuous track that loops over top of the superstructure, and a generally boxy design.
The Churchill in World War II had a phenomenal combat record and was adapted to carry things like mortars, flamethrowers.
Yes, including engineering vehicles built on it. Basically, anything that they could strap to a Churchill, they did. In many respects, the Churchill is the last true tank as built by the original British design philosophy for the idea.
By about midway through the war, the Churchill ran its course, and they needed to design something new. During this time, the Comet tank was in development, as well as the Centurion. Department of Tank Design wanted a new heavy infantry tank, one that could field the 17-pounder. Vauxhall Motors was approached with the idea of making this new heavy infantry tank, and they decided that they would build it as much as possible like a Churchill. They would use the designs and lessons learned from Churchill development to build this new tank, which maybe is why it looks like a giant Churchill.
And even though it bears a superficial appearance, which would suggest a Churchill inspiration, it shares effectively no parts, being a completely new design in almost every respect.
It's bigger in almost every way. It has a different turret. It has the same style of suspension, but it's not the same. It has wider tracks, same type of armor layout. Everything looks almost extremely similar, but nothing's really interchangeable. It's literally, a normal Churchill weighs around 40 tons. The Black Prince weighs somewhere around 50 tons.
It's effectively a Churchill plus.
The reason why they won this new tank was they wanted something that could carry a high-velocity gun. And the argument was that they wanted something that could attack a defended point, and once you have that point, be able to defend it from attacking tanks. So they wanted something that could do assaulting, but also be a tank destroyer, if that makes any sense. Something that could engage infantry and defensive targets, but also something that could engage other tanks. This all sounds great on paper, and would probably be a pretty decent tank in World War II. There was one gigantic problem with the Black Prince, and you may have noticed if you played in-game. It does like 10 to 11 miles per hour. And when I originally started playing this game, I asked somebody that knew quite a bit about tanks, and I said, hey, why is this thing so slow? And they said, oh, it's got a governor on it so that it can't outrun its troops. And I kind of believe that because it was an infantry tank. Well, as you do some digging, you find out they actually just took the same engine, the same Bedford engine that was out of the Churchill, the same one that you have in the Mark 7 in-game, and shoved it into the Black Prince. So remember that 10-ton difference we talked about? You have a grossly underpowered engine trying to move this behemoth. There was another engine available for this tank called the Rolls-Royce Meteor engine that was built by Rover. If the Black Prince was to use this engine over the Bedford engine from the earlier Churchill models, it would have quite possibly gotten to somewhere between 20 to 22 miles per hour. For some reason, they stuck with the Bedford engine that only allowed the Black Prince to move at somewhere around 10 to 11 miles per hour. It was just grossly underpowered. It made turning hard, you can see that in game. Getting up hills is almost impossible, you can see that in game. And with the gearbox they gave it, it is hellacious in reverse. So the Black Prince that we see in game could have maybe not been the ultimate Black Prince that would have maybe entered production if it had this other engine.
The Rolls-Royce Meteor, it's worth mentioning, was in service with the as being designed Comet and the Cromwell series. So it's not out of the question that they could have sourced some of these engines.
The other issue this guy had at moving 11 miles per hour was it was too big to load on a train car. So if you were to move it across Europe in World War II, you would have to drive it, right? Or drag it by horses? I'm not sure how the hell you move this thing.
Maybe a big trailer, get a bunch of trucks.
I mean, it's 1944, 45, so this guy would have it would have been hell to move across the European front. It would have taken forever for it to catch
The war
up.
would have been done by the time it got to the front.
It's an issue. Now let's get to the Black Prince's turret. And the 6 prototypes that were built, they all had the same style of turret, and it's kind of baffling. The turret is, we can call it underwhelming. They kind of just took slabs of metal, welded it together, put a big metal box on the back, welded that on, and then took this big cast mantlet, threw that on the front. They did make a good change by moving the commander to behind the gunner, where it was on the Comet and the new Centurion. The Centurion's turret is cast metal, and if Sturmling, you want to explain the difference between when you weld slabs of metal together and cast?
No, cast is you make a mold, and you simply pour molten metal into it, and it takes on the form of the cast. You then break it open, and you have the preformed, basically, shape. With welded sheets or rolled homogeneous armor, you're taking a slab of metal, cutting it to shape, and then actually welding the different pieces together.
And the problem with welding pieces together is that those welds can be a weak point and a point of failure.
However, the individual plates are stronger than the whole of the cast.
So one theory that me and Sturmling have been doing some digging on, and we there's nothing to really necessarily say they would have done this, but there's some, I guess you call it hints or clues and interest that they were going to maybe put the Centurion's turret onto the Black Prince if it entered production. So maybe a different engine and the Centurion's turret, and you might have had a pretty badass machine.
I think that's fair to say, but we do need to lead into its real Achilles heel. The fact that even with those improvements, the vehicle was doomed because the Centurion represented the birth of a new idea in tank design, whereas the Black Prince represents the end of the original infantry support role for the tank. The Centurion marks the dawn of the universal tank concept, a tank that does basically all jobs relatively well enough that you don't need multiple different classes of tank. That was ultimately the final nail in the coffin for that design philosophy.
And they did the right thing if you look back at history.
Yes.
The Centurion found itself in the jungles and the mountains and the deserts. Almost every theater of this planet the Centurion has been to over probably 35, 40-year span with
It
different
served in
variations.
numerous militaries across the world and featured countless modifications.
So the Black Prince lost to a worthy foe, you could say.
A much more worthy opponent bested it.
And to leave it at this, the Black Prince, if you took this thing to the Korean War, imagine a Black Prince in the Korean War. It would have been a liability in those mountains.
Yes.
You take this thing to a swamp, it'd be a liability. Take it to a jungle, it'd be a liability. It was pretty much designed for one job, and that'd be the Western Front, World War II. So let's talk about how you should play this in-game if you have this, and talk about its strengths and weaknesses, right? A little bit of education about what we've learned about our time playing it. The thing that you should, the highlight of this vehicle in-game is the 17-pounder gun that can fire APDS that has roughly around 200 millimeters of penetration at most ranges. Very, very punchy gun, extremely accurate at long ranges. The gun has a good mixture of power and reload, which I really like.
It's also got really good armor.
Well, what you need to realize is even though it may be bigger than your normal Churchill, it basically has the same armor as the Churchill Mark 7. They didn't really strengthen the armor for some reason. They changed the front of it so that the driver has a little bit better view, I guess. But they didn't really change anything else. On the side armor, most of the turret armor from the front, it's pretty much the same as the Churchill Mark 7.
So it's really just
an oversized Churchill.
You took the expand tool to a Churchill Mark 7 and gave it a new gun.
Yeah, I always thought for the longest time that this thing would have had better armor than your smaller Churchills, but not really, no.
Oh, well, that's actually a grave disappointment.
What you want to do, though, when you play this thing is keep the front towards enemy. Do not let them on your sides. The reason being is that there's no ammo stored in the turret. That's good. The ammo, though, is stored on the side where the armor is most vulnerable, and you can kind of erupt. There's also a good hint that when you are facing something from the front, twist the hull of your tank a bit so you get those big tracks in the way, especially heat rounds. Heat rounds don't like tracks. And you'll be surprised that you can survive some good 88mm and larger size shells just by hitting your drive wheels or your tracks. They'll eat it. This thing, you'll feel like your tracks always fall off, but they're saving your life.
It's like the best kind of add-on armor at the expense of mobility.
It really is. Those tracks will eat more rounds than you'll ever expect. It is slow. Is it game-breaking slow for you? No. But you won't be the first to an objective. You probably will never get to an objective, depending on if it's on a hill or something. It's just fast enough to move around. If you want to play this thing correctly, let's use that in air quotes, correctly, you usually want to find long lines of sight, sit back, snipe your enemies. Use that APDS round at long range.
I was going to say, make use of the gun's strengths rather than the vehicle's strengths. You've got enough armor that at distance, most rounds, it's difficult to get good hits. So with that slight angling, you really play to your vehicle, both of your vehicle strengths, without having to really rely on its weaknesses. Or having to suffer from its weaknesses.
Just remember, Claymore Mine, front towards enemy.
Yes. And keep your distance.
The last thing we're going to finish up with is this tank is currently for sale on the Steam store. It may be a couple other places, but that's the only place that I could find for sure. I believe it was pulled off the War Thunder store some wild time back. I don't know when it may return. If it does come up for sale, should you buy it? And the simple answer is no. I would recommend all three variations of the Centurion premium tanks first. The AVRE, the Israeli one, and the STRV. I would
yes.
give those three my signature as recommendations.
Much like the actual British Army.
They're just better, well-rounded vehicles in terms of firepower, mobility, armor. It's all pretty... You'll get more use out of them.
They're the whole package.
That being said, I do believe that the Black Prince has some novelty to it, and I've enjoyed playing it in ridiculous ways, chasing enemies, and it's fun. You can have fun in this tank. Is it overwhelmingly powerful? No. Is it survivable? Yes. You know what I mean? I'd say it's like a 6 out of 10, I guess. It's not bad, but...
It's good at what it does.
There's 3 other premiums that were added since it was introduced that are better.
All better value.
But this tank has a lot of character. And for me, sometimes I just like to buy premiums that have character.
Yes. It's a unique experience.
So hopefully you learned something from today's episode. And thank you, Sturmling, for joining me.
Anytime.
We'll catch you guys next time.